Hi class. Today we are moving into the second half of digestive system. We will start talking about intestinal contraction and motility. Now in the small intestine, there are mainly two types of movements. We have peristalsis and segmentation. However, for testing purpose, I want you to remember that segmentation is the major or the dominant contraction occurring in the small intestine. Peristalsis, although exists in the small intestine, however, it is weaker. It is a weaker type of movement. Now, segmentation actually helps the food to mix with the chyme, and this is muscular constrictions of the lumen which occur simultaneously at different intestinal segments. So we have more segmentation in the proximal end of the intestine than in the distal end. Okay, so by proximal end we mean duodenum and jejunum will have more segmentation as compared to ileum, which is the distal end of the small intestine. Now the question is, what causes these contractions? Well, to understand that, we have to understand a special type of cell called interstitial cells of Kajal. Some people also call it interstitial cells of Kahal. Now, if you think of the intestine, there is smooth muscles there, right? So interspersed or mixed with the smooth muscle cells, there is a special type of cell, and that is called interstitial cell of Kahal. Remember, these cells are neither neurons nor smooth muscles. And here I'm going to draw out the interstitial cells of Kahal or Kajal and how they participate in making the intestinal contractions. So to start with, I will just draw some smooth muscle cells here. So these are smooth muscle cells. Okay. Now the smooth muscle cells, remember, they are connected to each other by these special channels called gap junctions. So they are communicating with each other by gap junctions. So if cells are connected to each other by gap junctions, are they sharing cytoplasm? Yes, they are. So the idea is, if let's say this cell gets depolarized, the wave of depolarization will easily spread through all the muscle cells via the gap junctions. Remember, the gap junctions help in faster communication between cells. Therefore, we can say that the cells of the small intestine work together in syncytium, or we say that they work as a single unit or functional syncytium, meaning they work together. Okay. Now, hold on. Here we have the specialized cells, and these cells are called interstitial cells of Kajal. Remember, these cells are also connected to each other and connected to the muscle cells via gap junctions. So we have gap junctions in between the smooth muscle cells, and we have gap junctions between the interstitial cells of Kahal or Kajal. They also have gap junctions. Okay. All right. Now what are these cells doing? What are the interstitial cells of Kajal doing? These cells, first, remember, they produce something called slow waves. So these cells produce slow waves. What are slow waves? Are they action potentials? No. Slow waves are not action potentials. These cells, they behave like pacemaker cells of the heart, and as they produce the slow waves, if the slow waves are depolarized enough, then the interstitial cells of Kajal communicate with the smooth muscle cells, and the smooth muscle cells in turn shoot out action potential. So remember, the slow waves which are generated by the interstitial cells of Kajal regulates depolarization of the smooth muscle cells. And as the smooth muscle cells depolarize, that opens voltage-gated calcium channels in the smooth muscles. And then calcium comes in, and that leads to depolarization of smooth muscles. This results in action potential, and due to the action potential, we have wave of contraction of the smooth muscle layer of the small intestine. So to review, interspersed within the smooth muscle cells, there are specialized cells called interstitial cells of Kajal. Remember, these cells, as we mentioned before, these cells are neither neurons nor muscle cells. The interstitial cells of Kajal, they do not produce action potentials. Instead, they generate something called slow waves, which are pacemakers. So these cells are considered pacemakers because they produce the slow waves. If the slow wave is strong enough, that leads to depolarization of the smooth muscle cells by opening up calcium channels in the smooth muscles. As these gated calcium channels open up, calcium rushes in, resulting in depolarization, which results in an action potential, and a wave of contraction originates in the smooth muscle layer of the intestine. Okay. So looking at the PowerPoint, we will focus on the picture first. We do see the blue cells that are connected to each other, and these cells are called interstitial cells of Kajal. They produce slow waves. So they generate the slow waves. And remember, these cells are connected to each other by gap junctions. And these cells are also connected to the smooth muscle by gap junctions. So the slow waves, when it's strong enough, depolarizes the smooth muscle cells by opening up the calcium channels, and that results in generation of action potential. And remember, as the action potential is generated, that results in a mechanical event of intestinal contraction. Okay. Moving on to the large intestine, but before we talk about the physiology, I will go over the anatomy of the large intestine real quick because this will help us understand the functions better. So to start with, hold on. Okay. So large intestine forms a three-sided perimeter around the small intestine. The first segment of the large intestine is this pouch, and this is called the cecum. The ileum is connected to the cecum via the ileocecal valve. The cecum leads to the ascending colon, which then makes a 90-degree turn to form the transverse colon, which then makes another 90-degree turn to form the descending colon, which then forms the S or the sigmoid colon, leading to the rectum, which ultimately terminates into the anal canal. Now, what happens in the large intestine? The primary function of the large intestine is to reabsorb water and electrolytes and compact all the undigested food material into fecal matter. Remember, absorption of nutrients take place in the small intestine, but absorption of water and electrolytes are the primary function of the large intestine. It, along with the water and electrolytes, large intestine also absorbs some vitamin K and other vitamins. Now, the product of digestion, the product of digestion that cannot be broken down, they form waste products. And ultimately, after water and electrolytes have been absorbed, the waste material passes to the rectum, leading to the increase in rectal pressure. That leads to relaxation of the internal anal sphincter and urge to defecate. If the urge to defecate is denied, feces are prevented from entering the anal canal by another sphincter muscle. In this case, feces remain in the rectum and may even back up into the sigmoid colon. And this is a common problem in little kids who are being potty trained and also in young adults or teenage people. There are specialized nurses who actually train kids and teenage, little kids and teenage kids they work with them to train them about the importance of defecation on a daily basis. Okay, so the large intestine problems, we will now talk about some of the problems associated with the large intestine. The first one is appendicitis. Now, appendix is a tiny little sac-like structure. It's called vermiform appendix. It's a sac-like or outpouching of the cecum. Now, you have to understand that appendix has no role in digestion, but contains numerous lymphoid nodules and may house a population of helpful bacteria that help to replenish the normal intestinal microbiota when needed. Now, appendicitis is a medical emergency that produces pain in the lower right abdominal quadrant, nausea, and if not addressed in time, this can even lead to death of the patient. So for testing purpose, just know that appendicitis is inflammation of the vermiform appendix. Another problem associated with large intestine is diarrhea, which is excretion of large amount of fluid in the fecal, and the most common cause is stomach flu, which causes inflammation and irritation of the stomach and leading to excessive fluid loss.